There we go. All right, well, let's kick things off. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Boldin. I'm the director of artistic operations here at Pittsburgh Opera, and I'm thrilled to host our 23-24 season of Opera Up Close, kicking things off with our opening production of The Barber of Seville. I couldn't be more thrilled nor flattered that I have this amazing group of artists with me today to talk about this wonderful piece. So I fortunately will have less to say and just let the experts jump in with all of their incredible knowledge and experiences with this work. And I want to thank them all for taking some time out of their day on this beautiful Steelers Sunday to join us, one of their days off in a very long rehearsal process. So very happy to have you all here. So thank you very, very much. Let me do a quick round of introductions so everybody knows. We have with us Gregory Keller, our stage director, all the way from Hawaii. Welcome. Our title character, Figaro John McCullough, joining us, making his Pittsburgh Opera debut, as well as Gregory. Indeed, thank you. We have the lovely Stephanie Dosch making her Pittsburgh Opera debut as Rosina. Up there, at least in my corner, we have Musa Nkungwana coming back to us after several productions, no stranger to Pittsburgh Opera, joining us for this production as Dr. Bartolo. Very excited. And then last but certainly not least, our esteemed maestro and music director, Antony Walker, leading this production for us this season. So thank you all truly for being here. This is always such a joy for me to have this conversation and be a part of it, but truly hope all of you out there in Zoom land enjoy it as much as I know I will. Those of you out there, if you have questions, as always, feel free to put them in the chat. I will see them come in, and as I can weave them in, I will definitely do that. And if any of you guests see the question come in and want to jump on it, by all means, please do as well. And we want to answer as many burning questions, Mark Abramowitz, as you may have. So without further ado, let me kick things off. I'm going to go to Greg first. And basically just kind of, I'd love to get your take on this production. Forgive me for asking the question, but is it fair to say, I see that, Mark, is it fair to say that this is not your first Barber of Seville, or is it?
It's the first Barber. I've assisted on Barber of Seville before, but I've never directed it, actually.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
In essence, my first Barber of Seville, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I should say in that regard, in terms of assisting, Greg spent many years on the staff at the Metropolitan Opera. And so he is obviously well-versed in this repertoire, but I guess in some ways thrilled that you're making your directorial debut with this piece with us.
Yeah.
We're very flattered to have you with us. So Greg, would you mind giving that 35,000-foot view of what the piece is about in terms of, or any tidbits therein that are kind of worth noting? I think it may be safe to say that we've all seen it, but you know, if we haven't, it might be good to just kind of give us that high-level overview of the synopsis and kind of, at least with these three, our three principals that we have with us, how they might interact, and then just kind of give us that framework.
All right. Well, one thing I always try to think about is when the piece was first presented, how the audience related to the piece. So in a way, I'm sort of an originalist, if that makes any sense. I always think it's fascinating to think about what opening night for the piece was like. And often these operas were not well received initially, and then now they're sort of in the canon. And I think it's really important to note that these, the source material for these operas, I consider it an odd trio of Barber of Seville, Marriage of Figaro, and The Guilty Mother, which becomes The Ghost of Versailles eventually, just 20 years ago, are three plays by French playwright Beaumarchais. He is an incredibly fascinating figure. I'll give you the briefest of outlines. He basically was a watchmaker, had a patent dispute. He won the patent dispute, became watchmaker to Louis XV taught his 4 daughters harp lessons. He was a musician, a playwright. He ends up getting very attracted to the ideas of Voltaire and the Enlightenment ideas of the rights of man, the rights of women. He is basically a middle-class guy who works so hard, he makes enough money, he buys a title and joins the high society of the upper class, the aristocrats. As the American colonies are starting to revolt against Britain, he's very much on the side of the French, or equally against the side of Britain. So he wants to help the American colonies. He forms a shell company called Rodrigue Hortalgo and Company, Hortalis and Company, and he basically funnels blankets and money and ammunition and guns through the West Indies and to Portsmouth, New Hampshire to help the American revolutionaries win the war, and in exchange he gets tobacco back. He's just this wonderful, crazy guy. Then, as the French Revolution happens, he gets exiled to, I believe, Holland, or just wonderful, wonderful guy. And he has one of the largest libraries of Voltaire's works by the time the end of his life. So he's a revolutionary, a thinker. He's a real proponent of the common man. And that's really who Figaro is. Figaro is, in essence, Beaumarchais. It's a pun on his name, Fils Caron. His name is Pierre Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais. So Fils Caron is the son of Caron, Figaro. He puts himself in these 3 plays. Rossini, this play is first turned into an opera by Paisiello, which didn't get as many legs. As about 30, 40 years later, Rossini writes a version, which is the one we all know now. Of course, we know the second play, Marriage of Figaro. Mozart, 2 years after he sees the play on stage, writes the opera. So these are contemporary works of the time. These are contemporary comedies, or more specific, farces, and they are really aimed at skewering the rich. This is really kind of the first episode of White Lotus, if I may. And he's taken basically a commedia dell'arte character and given him 3-dimensional form and given him teeth, given him ammunition, shall I say, to really use humor and wit and his intellect to skewer the eccentricities and excesses of the aristocratic class. So for me, what fascinates me is how to recreate that similar experience when now this piece feels, perhaps a little dusty and a little old and a little, it's done all over the place. We all kind of know the story. So how do you kind of breathe some of that original flavor, original aroma back into the production? So that's basically what I've tried to do. Is to make a nod to this piece as being a couple hundred years old, and also kind of throwing in a few anachronistic things here and there to make us realize that we're just as messed up, just as easily ridiculed as we were 200 years ago.
I love that. I think that having watched Friday's final room run, it definitely keeps us all looking in several places all at once. So I want to ask Antony, in terms of the compositional side of things and how that relates, and how Rossini sort of took up the mantle of this story and decided to put pen to paper, and what that side of things looks like.
Well, one thing, hello everybody. It's nice to see a couple of you, but nice to know you're all there. One thing I really appreciate about Rossini is that he was really steeped in the theater and in music. His mother was a singer. His father was a trumpet player in one of the military bands, in the garrison in Bologna, I believe. And so he would almost literally be hanging off his mother's skirts backstage in performances while she was on stage. And he learned the piano, he learned French horn. He also sang. By the way, it's sort of commonly acknowledged that his his register was the same register as Figaro's. High baritone, low tenor. So Rossini, although he was reasonably young when he wrote this, I can't remember quite how old. He'd written at least about almost 10 other operas before this. And also, curiously enough, in the same year, in 1816, he later wrote what was regarded in the 19th century as the definitive version of Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, set as an opera. And it was only supplanted by Verdi's Otello at the end of the century. But for about 60 years, Rossini's Otello was like the last word on that story, which is very interesting. And it's a good piece too. I've conducted it, and Rossini brings a sort of wealth of musical and theatrical experience to this piece, and you can tell. All the vocal lines are. All the vocal parts have their difficulties. Some are extremely difficult and some are moderately difficult, but they're all difficult. And Rossini really understood his singers very well, I think, and crafted music that is, melodically very, very inventive and also very virtuosic. And once you've got it under your belt, it's actually quite fun to sing too. And I think that's one of the things that I find that I enjoy, discovering in rehearsal is, when we go through the staging and we've had the music calls and everything, and we're getting towards, like we are, the music run. People are, the cast is now starting to get very, very comfortable with the synthesis of the staging and the singing, and so you can see that everyone's starting to have a lot of fun, and that, I think, transmits itself, really well. Just on the Beaumarchais track, I put in the chat, I put this fascinating document, which is on the CIA website, cia.gov, about, and was unclassified in 1993, about Beaumarchais and the American Revolution. It's a long read. And it just, it solidifies the fact that this actually really did happen. Beaumarchais really did open that shell company, Rodrigue Hortalez et Compagnie, at the behest of Louis. It's also fascinating because I'm not quite sure. Beaumarchais was an opportunist as well. He was very much a Figaro. When he saw an opportunity, he took it, especially if it provided him with financial gain, and especially if it got him out of a hole. And Beaumarchais was in a lot of trouble for various reasons, and went to Louis the 15th, I think it was, because he lived through two kings, and wanted to get back into the king's favor, and said, "I will do anything you like, but get me back to court." And Louis said, "Well, first of all, I want you to go and go to England as my spy, and round up all the pamphlets of Madame du Barry, my mistress, you can possibly find that are scurrilous towards her," which he did. Then he went off to the court of Catherine the Great, and did some spying there. And then the king wasn't done with him, and said, "You've got to do this on my behalf, and we can't let anybody know that the French are on the side of the American revolutionaries." There's also a fascinating sort of sideline to all this. There is an organ, a portable organ, at the Frick Museum, which is like a block from where I'm staying. I'm Point Breeze North. That actually was in the royal household at Versailles, and it's not too much of a stretch to think that Beaumarchais' fingers touched that organ. Because he was an instructor to the royal children. So that's a fascinating bit of history that potentially connects us in Pittsburgh with Beaumarchais. And just in case you thought that Beaumarchais was was totally altruistic, he had not been paid for some of the work for the arms and etc. that he had run in full, and he had tried to get back from the Americans this money. And there is a letter, which you'll see at the end of this Beaumarchais document if you read it, that basically says, look, I'm about to die now, but could you please repay my debt to my daughters? And they did, but they said, oh, we'll give you 800,000 livres, pounds, which was half of what they owed, and basically you can take it or leave it. And the daughters took it. But so it was a wild story anyway, and that has nothing to do with Barber of Seville, but it's just intensely fascinating.
Which is what you get when you come to Opera Up Close.
Oh boy. And
Anthony, sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to say that, and one of the things that I'm really happy about with this particular production, and the wonderful cast we have. I mean, all the three wonderful singers that you see here, Stephanie, John, and Musa, and of course, and we have Lunga and Brian as well. One of the things that I've been trying to underscore, which these artists do so well, is that you actually have to sing this music really well as act it really well, and the attention to detail to the music and to the language really makes this all pop. And I'm just so excited that we have such fantastic singers who could really do this justice, in not only in the comic but in the serious moments, and who are also such fantastic actors and such wonderful colleagues. And I think that everyone's there's been a lovely atmosphere in the room, very collegial, very and very supportive, and where none of us are afraid to try things. And sometimes we push the limits on things. I mean, including myself. And then we think, oh, okay, maybe I went a bit too far there. Okay, fine. But there's this freedom in the room, and this ethos of, well, let's try stuff, because that's what rehearsals are for. And with some casts who have done Barber of Seville a gazillion times, that's hard to get, because the very famous phrase, well, at this point, I do this, has never come up with this cast, which I'm very grateful for you, to you, all of you, for, because it's just, everyone's very open and fresh, and I think that's really gonna come across. And when I was rehearsing the orchestra, it was both it was gratifying both to know that basically 85% of the orchestra had done this piece with me and other Rossinis and other Mozarts over the last 20 years that I've been here. But also really grateful for the fact that even though everyone had done the piece, we were still being spontaneous, we're still being in the moment. And there were certain things I was saying, we're going to do this a bit differently. And other things I didn't have to say, I just showed, and they would go, oh, okay, let's go. And I think that's really wonderful. And I really treasure my relationships with the orchestra and the chorus for that reason. We know each other really well, and we can also try things and experiment.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Amy, I see your question, and I'm going to actually punt that when I get into Musa and John and Stephanie, because I think that'll be an interesting portion there, because none of them are new to these roles. They've all done their roles before, so I think that's an interesting question for them. Antony, I love your point about kind of the spirit in the room. I find, or have found, getting to know this cast, that the spirit of everybody and the personalities very much feel like they match the spirit of the work, if that makes sense. And oddly, I feel like somehow I think that works out in the singer world. People who sing different types of repertoire, somehow the spirit or the essence of the people match the spirit of the work, if you will, in some ways. But that aside, I completely agree with you. All of the energy and the personalities very much funnel into this work, and so I too agree that I think we have a really good mix and chemistry heading into Tech Week and then for opening. So I'm excited to sort of watch it evolve. I did want to ask this question and address Mark's question here, where he says, how familiar was Rossini's audience with Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro? Antony, I'll start with you, and obviously Greg, please chime in. I venture that he would have been, because obviously, Mozart had written his first. And curiously wondering, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, I just thought of this question. Do we know if Rossini ever flirted with writing The Marriage of Figaro, not unlike he did with The Barber of Seville? So obviously we had a Barber of Seville that another composer had written. Seemingly Rossini thought he maybe could do it better, so he wrote his own. But did he just not touch Le Nozze di Figaro because it was Herr Mozart, and he said, you know what, I'm going to leave that alone out of curiosity? Maybe we don't know the answer to that, and I'll post that on my blog. I'm kidding, I don't have a blog, but curious if we know anything about that.
It's a very good question. I was just watching a philosophy podcast which was exhorting people to say I don't know when you don't know. So I'm first of all say I don't know. But Rossini had two compositional gods by all account, and they were Mozart and Haydn, and in some respects which I don't quite understand, but apparently it's been reported that I've read it, that he valued Haydn even more highly over Mozart. And if you actually think about it, Haydn's way of composing, like, for example, think of the Adam and Eve scene in The Creation. That could almost have been written by Rossini. I think that is closer to Rossini than anything Rossini wrote is closer to Mozart. So in some respects, I feel but Haydn had a more simple style of composing harmonically, and he had quite simple melodic gestures. But anyway, so I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect that Rossini knew Le Nozze di Figaro, but I don't know how much that was performed in Italy, particularly because opera in Italy at that time tended to be Italian opera. There was, and performed by Italian singers. Curiously enough, Mozart was revered all around the place. Mozart didn't really go back to Italy after he made his tour as like a 14, 15-year-old, when he wrote things like Mitridate Re di Ponto and things like that, and was, obviously, and the famous episode of the Sistine Chapel when he wrote down from memory the Allegri Miserere. But he was more famous in France, and more famous in Mozart. This is more famous in England. But he was so respected in France that after he died, the French Académie, I think, which is the opera at the time, in 1794, I think, was it, or 92, 93, 93 after his death, decided as an act of homage to actually put on Le Nozze di Figaro, which was the first opera put on by the Academy that was not in French. It was the first opera that they put on that wasn't composed in French. But interestingly enough, they asked Beaumarchais himself to translate the text back into French for these performances and to provide the dialogues. So obviously Mozart, soon after his death, was very well regarded and feted. And Le Nozze di Figaro was understood to be a masterpiece, but I don't know whether it was performed in Rome or not, and whether anyone would have had that sort of knowledge of it. I suspect, you hit the nail on the head when you said, Barber of Seville was already an existing libretto, and Rossini was a young fella, and often they would give the younger composers the pre-existing librettos in the theater, because the impresarios would know that at least the story was successful with the public. Paesiello had composed a version, possibly others. And so, they take a punt on the youngster Rossini with this pre-existingly successful libretto. It's the Paesiello for example, by the way, is not actually a very good piece. I have the score. I was thinking of trying to put it on with my my previous life as someone who conducted a lot of this stuff on period instruments. I was considering doing that with my company back in Australia, but it's just not strong enough in the way that Rossini's Otello, even though it's not Verdi's Otello, is still a very strong piece. But the Paesiello is just...
Well, it's just again, maybe just a topic for around the water cooler, or over a beer. Did he out of reverence for Mozart, obviously, which he had, he probably left that one alone, but clearly the other one, he had other ideas. Greg, I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, just out of curiosity, and it's not meant to put anybody on the spot, just kind of throwing that out there. But
I do think it's interesting at the finale of Barber, he says, "Let love and eternal faith, reign forever," which perhaps is a twist because he knows what happens in the next play,
right?
Which is 4 years later, and the Count's faithfulness is not as eternal as one would hope, shall we say?
The only libretto or title that I can think of that Rossini used that came from either Haydn or Mozart is actually a title that comes from Haydn, and it's Haydn's last opera, which Haydn thought was his best. Sorry, not his last opera; it's his second or third last opera. But the one that Haydn himself thought was his greatest opera, and which I think is fantastic, Armida of Haydn, and of course Rossini wrote an Armida as well. And that's the only, and maybe Mark Abramovitz will be able to put me straight on this, but that's the only title I think that Rossini has in common with either Haydn or Mozart.
Yeah. Let me pivot to our cast, because I want to make sure we bring them in and have some time with all of them. And again, it has been a total joy getting to know all of you. Musa, of course, you are no stranger to Pittsburgh, so it's been lovely to have you back. But John and Stephanie, welcome to Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh Opera. We are thrilled to have you. And as I've said several times already, I'm very excited after what we've got to experience Friday, to watch it sort of evolve. And then, finally pressing toward opening on Saturday. Stephanie, I'm going to start with you and welcome. So the one thing that I always find kind of interesting is that tell us a little bit about Rosina, first of all, and your take on her. I know those of us who've seen it know, but she could come off as maybe less savvy than I think she is in many ways. I mean, it's called The Barber of Seville. You have these other male characters who are very prominent in this piece, but in so many ways, it all kind of revolves around this relationship, and also, other than Berta, which is a much smaller part, amongst all of these male figures, she's the only female. And that's always a really interesting dynamic on stage. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about Rosina, your experience with her, and how you bring her to life.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Dosh, and I'm so happy to be here in Pittsburgh. What I love about performing Rosina is that she is a character with many different sides to her. But you're right, we don't really assume how savvy or clever she is from the get-go. The way that the opera opens up, we are outside of the house where she is kept locked inside by the irritating and controlling Dr. Bartolo. He is her tutor and her guardian, and she has no decision-making on whether or not she can leave the house. And so we see the Count and Figaro make a plan to try to get into the house to get the Count and Rosina to meet, because the Count has been singing to Rosina when Rosina comes out to her balcony. And So initially, we can kind of assume or think that maybe Rosina is a damsel in distress, right? This is a story that we're familiar with. However, in the very next scene, Rosina has an opportunity to introduce herself to the audience. We are now inside the house, and she has decided to write a letter to this sweet man who sings to her when she is out on her balcony. She doesn't know that he's the Count, but she knows that he has a good heart and that she would love to be with him, get out of the house, and much more certainly spend the rest of her life with him than with Dr. Bartolo. So as she's writing this letter, she introduces herself to the audience. She says, "Hi, I'm Rosina. I am a sweet and respectable young woman, young 17-year-old woman. And however, if you cross my path or get in my way, you will not like the end result. I will outwit you. I will show you who's boss." And so the audience is actually the first person, group of people to get a taste of this savvy side of Rosina. And as the opera continues, we see how each of the subsequent characters, most of them men, as you've said, realize, whoa, Rosina actually has a lot of clever ideas that are better than mine. And I think that audience members, we root for the underdog, and Rosina is someone who has a lot of odds stacked against her, and we really love seeing her win. And because of that, I love portraying her on stage. I love speaking directly to the audience of, hey, look at what I'm about to do. They have no idea what's about to happen. And the audience gets a little taste of what's about to happen and gets to see all the other characters learn about the charm and intelligence and savviness that Rosina possesses.
Yeah, she's far more complex. I love that you said, we kind of the opera opens and we can it sort of feels like damsel in distress kind of situation, but we are quickly introduced to her and realize that that is not the case, and she has her finger on the pulse and pulls many of the strings, and she's already a step ahead in some cases of the witful Figaro himself, which is a lovely little moment in the libretto and in the score. So I think that that's a really interesting take on all of that. This is not your first Rosina, correct?
Correct. This is my third time performing her. And all of these productions have happened in 2023 alone. So I've been pretty fortunate to, back to back, be able to perform her and kind of add on to my experience portraying her every time. And even prior to that, one of the fun things about the Barber of Seville and a lot of Rossini's operas is that the Barber of Seville is very excerptable. So throughout my training, I would be assigned the duet that Rosina sings with Figaro, or the ti 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 piano piano trio. So even before I had the opportunity to perform the full role, I have been performing her ensembles for quite a few years.
Sort of piecing it together and then finally getting that green light. It's kind of nice. And when that happens, because you're not cracking the binding, so to speak, from the first time that you get the call for the first offer. So that's great. Well, we'll circle back for sure in terms of a couple of other things. Mark, I see your question, and we will definitely we'll have Stephanie kind of chime in on that as well, because I think that that's a kind of a unique scenario. But I want to kick it over to John and bring him into the conversation. So this is one of those things where you are portraying arguably one of the most iconic roles in the canon. I mean, no pressure, no pressure. And potentially one of the most, notable or, recognizable arias in the canon. I mean, if we've all been to an opera event, if there's a high baritone involved, we are hearing the Largo. And so I'm curious, and also too, this is not your first foray into the Barber of Seville either, correct?
Yes, this is my seventh time doing the production. I've done it twice as the officer, once as Fiorello, and this is the fourth Figaro. So I've had my rounds around the baritone parts and worked my way up through the years.
That's kind of amazing. I love that. So tell us a little bit about your Figaro, who he is, how you get into his skin, so to speak, and a little bit about maybe how you've grown with him over some of these productions.
Yeah, I mean, well, interestingly enough, I was like looking at Amy's question here. It's how do you keep the standard piece fresh without distorting the material? And having been around this for a while, it's so jam-packed with so many things that there's always something new to find out, especially when you have two great people in the head of the room who are alerting you to things that you've maybe not thought of before, or things that you didn't know to begin with. It makes a big difference, especially from us on the rehearsal side. There's this thing going around on TikTok right now with like John Cleese, I think, forget his name, talking about creativity and how creativity is fostered when you are not in a situation where you're afraid to make mistakes, and it's has the adverse effect when you're in an environment where you are constantly on edge about making a mistake. Nothing will thwart creativity faster than that environment, which is the total opposite of the environment that we have, which I think in turn makes for the best product for the audience. So I think that there are things that I've not ever thought about in this. I mean, like one thing, like there's an entrance in the Act 1 finale where I've always entered at this one part right before I sing. And then I was talking to Greg, and Berta has this line, Il Barbiere, and I've always been like, I mean, I guess she's just kind of thinking like, the barber's behind all this, I'm sure. But actually, it makes so much more sense this way, where I come in to see all the commotion that's going on, because I constantly am in and out of the house because I have the key. I'm pulling teeth, I'm cutting hair, I'm plunging the toilet, I'm doing everything. And I come in then, and she says, "Oh, Il Barbiere," and it's a little thing, but it actually makes the whole plot of how he is kind of puppeteering everything that's going on a lot more clear, and how he starts to lose control, and that the second act, as we've also talked about with Greg, the second act is where the trio, like me, Rosina, and the Count, start to constantly lose control and play catch up, right? So I think that's kind of the first moment of that which happens in Act 1, is a clue into Act 2, which I've never done before. So I think there are a lot of those little gems in this production that keep it very fresh. So I'd say that's the long-winded answer to your question, Amy.
So what are some of the challenges in bringing Figaro to life? Because he's constantly on stage. There's one thing after another. There's a lot of stage business often. Those of you who come to see this will see lots of fun stage business. But how do you look at him? How do you get into him? How do you keep him in that, where do you start?
I mean, it's an interesting dichotomy because it is vocally quite difficult, and it's very front loaded. So all of the hardest stuff is in the first three things that he sings, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's you have to balance this difficult vocalism with coming across like it's the easiest thing in the world, because Figaro is the facilitator, and nothing puts people less at ease if the facilitator is going, I don't know how to do this. Right. So it's gotten a lot easier to sing over the years, luckily. But it's like Maestro Walker said, is as you once you learn this and it's really in your body, it becomes quite fun, and you start thinking about it's like with every role, once you can start thinking about the words rather than how to actually sing it, a whole new level of character can come out.
Yeah, I agree. I think anytime you're able to repeat a role, it gives you an opportunity to free up something else to allow for it to grow. And that's, I think we're very fortunate in this regard to have, it's to have all of you who bring so much to it already. So that it's really fantastic to watch. So Musa, I want to bring you into this conversation as well. Hello, sir.
Hey.
Welcome back to Pittsburgh. We're thrilled to have you, and thrilled to have you in this role. My experience with you here at Pittsburgh Opera, at least, is primarily some of the dramatic things. I mean, Queequeg in Moby Dick a few years ago, Leporello and Giovanni. So it's really fun to have you on our stage in this role, with as much patter and play as Greg has given you, or I should say Rossini and Greg. So I want to ask you a little bit about this character and how you look at him. I mean, he can, from my take, and you can reframe this if you like, but he can come off as a bit buffoonish, if you will. But I don't know that, sometimes that doesn't necessarily read have that level of sophistication. That's can be one-dimensional. And so, similar to my question for Stephanie and John, how do you bring him to life, and what are the kinds of things you go after in this character to really make him come off of the page and physicalize him on the stage?
Well, first, like vocally, it's a very difficult role.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a powerful role, and so most people, I would assume Maestro can correct me. Some people who have done this were usually people older who have done other roles, and maybe towards the end of their vocal lines or age or careers, and so there weren't many expectations for them to have to fully sing this the way it's written, because I mean it goes there in the passaggio forever and ever, E flats and Fs and all that, and you're supposed to sing this. And so I've seen some videos of people who just don't quite sing it. They do more comedy than singing it. But I'm younger, and it's important for me to sing it. And so going back to your question, so I think there are many dimensions of this role. I think, yes, he's buffoonish. I don't think he's dumb. I think the problem is that there are two levels.
Yeah.
He's highly intelligent in terms of academics. He's a doctor. He knows those things. But I don't think he has the street smarts like Figaro does. Also, I think he lacks emotional awareness as well as social awareness. and so I'm so smart, he says in the aria, he repeats himself. You cannot fool me, but they do fool him. And I think he's so stuck in his ego that I'm so smart, nothing anyone can do can actually fool me, such that he trips over himself over and over. Because all the things, if he were to just sit down and do nothing, his life would be easier. We also see that at some point, when we get to the second act, he does pick up some things because he doesn't trust anyone. So maybe that might be his guardian angel, because he manages to trick Rosina using her very same letter she wrote to her lover. Of course, unbeknownst to her is the Count. And he uses that. If it wasn't for Basilio coming with a notary, accepting the bribe from the Count might not have a chance, because Bartolo would have married her. So now coming to the third part of your question, how do I bring him to life? Well, first and foremost, getting into the parter, because it's so fast. My approach is the the fastest way to go there is the slowest way. And so just because it's fast, I cannot use the fast approach. Before we get to all the fast part, I have to do the tedious part, which is really tedious. And I want to stab myself at times because you're like a child learning something new and you want to do other stuff. So I have to go as slowly as possible. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. So I pick up the pace, but I have to do this every day. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. Change the pace. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. Change the pace. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. Change the pace. Signorina, un'altra volta quando Bartolo andrà fuori. But I cannot get to that fifth level if I have not done the very first one. So I have to do the stupid thing that is the tedious part, the seemingly less smart thing to do, like a child, doing it slowly until I get there. It seems to me that by the time you get to the first part, if you've now mastered the slow part, I still have some challenges at times if I trip over myself, if I don't keep to that, feeling the beat every time. And so how I get to this difficult part or any imbuing the role and to make it my own, I come with a fresh mind to say, I've never done this before. This is new, even if I might have done Barbiere before, but this is a new production. I'm going to approach Bartolo as a new thing that I've never done before. Because that way, when Maestro or Greg give me notes or things to do, I'm open to them, I can learn. It keeps me better and better. And so it's been slow and tedious, but slow and tedious gets me there because I can pick up things where even before I sing less, but I spend more time going through the words and the rhythm that way. And then some vocalism between, oh, is that vowel bright or is it dark or any of those things. So that by the time I start to sing, I have a concentrated 20 or 30 minutes of singing. But most of the time, 3 hours or 2 hours, whatever I spend each day, is really going through the words. Then another component is this. When we get to the rehearsals, because of it's a hard role, I don't mark. I do not like marking. If I'm tired, I may sing octave low. Marking for me gets me off my voice and gets me tired more than I sing. So the reason I sing, especially the hardest part all the time, is because my body has to be used to it. And so that there are no surprises. So I know tomorrow I've got the hits. I know parts where I have to work on. Because then if I don't do this, suddenly we get to the hits, I think I can sing full out. My body and my voice will be like, we are not used to this, so I'll get tired. So it's been like the slow burn for me, which I like, because now I've tuned out. I even told friends that I've been off social media for a while because I've been saying to myself, I need to work on some things, but I feel that there's a lot of distraction. So for 6 months, I'll be off this thing where I'm focused on what is it opera-wise I need to learn? What is it vocal-wise I need to work on? What is it even emotional-wise I need to work on? So I'm on vacation from life and I'm focused on work and me.
I love that. I love your example too of the patter and the slow and steady kind of build, because in addition to how quickly your aria ends, Rossini doesn't really do you any favors by all of that patter and then taking you up in your tessitura. I mean, he ends that section and then you have to come back and sing essentially like the refrain again. And so I mean, it's a challenge in all of that. And
another challenge is that, as soon as you finish the aria, you only have a reprieve from Berta's recitativo. And then the count comes in as the drunken soldier, you do the finale. And the finale, it's really mostly the count and Bartolo before everybody comes in. So it's a lot, And so if that is why I don't mark, because by the time the finale comes in, I'm ready for it. If I mark a lot and I think I'm just going to sing out the aria, by the time the finale comes in, I'm out vocally.
Yeah. John, your hand was up there for a second.
Yeah, I was just saying when Musa was going through that patter slowly, it's interesting to see, like I've done a fair amount of new opera, and you can tell when someone's maybe newer to writing for the voice, or someone who really knows writing for the voice. And Rossini definitely knew about writing for the voice in particular, because like, even though that's very quick, all of those vowels are lined up in the same spot, so you can do it all. Once you get it, it can all stay in the same place, kind of like column wise, sound wise. Even for like facciapura, all that is still all right there. And then una voce poco fa largo la factorum della città. I was just gonna say, because I did this in English, where that line is, "I'm the most popular guy in Seville, hello," which is really hard to sing. But it's interesting to just see like, I as you said, Maestro, that he was a singer himself, right? So that it shows, and it's nice as a singer to have.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean, I think, you know, in your aria, in Figaro's aria that opens early in the show, we all, those of us who know it or know what's coming, we all wait for those sort of, you know, those glisses on the I believe it's the strings, that brum 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 brum, and then you go into that patter, and we're all kind of waiting to see, you know, how the Figaro of the day handles it, and it's very much but it's a really interesting point that Rossini captures it so well that it's technically kind of in this column. And once you get it, like Musa was explaining, you can kind of ride the rail if you, you know, if you've gotten it in there. So Mike, I think you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, there's it's I love hearing the artists talk about how they approach things, and it's really fascinating to me how well we tend to think, you know, being in the 21st century, that people have sung, we've all sung like this for, you know, 200-300 years, but vocal technique has changed a lot, and it's even changed a lot. I think I don't know, I did a quick poll of the three singers we have here. Would each of you say that you feel your techniques go back to what could be counted as the classical bel canto technique? I mean, as a starting point.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I drive a truck, so, and I cannot move my voice as fast as those two can. So I don't know where my voice belongs to.
Well, it's not necessarily about how fast you can move it, but just the technicalities of appoggio and focus wherever that may be.
I believe in that. If by bel canto, the beautiful line and sticking to legato, that's how I always want to strive to sing.
Which, of course, people. One of the people who's accredited for this is Manuel Garcia, who was the first Count Alma Viva, right? So you're going so the idea,
or to blame,
yeah. And you know, it's interesting because so you get people like Garcia, who was Spanish, and then he really started to get hone his technique when he arrived in Italy. And study with, what's his name? There's a technical as Anselmi. Anyway, I can't quite remember. But and then Garcia was famous, the operatic world over, for producing this. It was very well produced, lined up, elegant, beautiful sound with a lot of flexibility. But I think that a lot of the singers around that time had lighter voices. You know, and we still tend to cast this. I don't think any of your voices are light by any means, but we still tend to, especially if you're not at the Met, say, you would tend to cast these Rossini roles with lighter voices, because generally speaking, they can move faster, and have this sort of elegance that is required. There's a different sort of elegance for heavier repertoire, but it's interesting because the types of singers that Rossini would have known would have been very similar to the singers at the end of Mozart's life that he would have known. And we just know that also because the theaters were much smaller. So you don't have to project in as, you don't have to make as big a sound, or you didn't back in those days. to be able to be heard. And of course, strings were on gut instruments. The brass players didn't play with the embouchure they play now. So the orchestra sounded like 50% as loud normally as what orchestras would sound now. And so I find this also really fascinating too, because it's one of the things that I tend to say to a lot of singers, particularly the resident artists, when they're dipping their toes into coloratura. And we all want to sing, we all tend to want to sing coloratura too loud, because we want it to project. But of course, the way that we can get our voices to move the fastest is by actually singing a little softer. And that would have just been par for the course for people back in Manuel Garcia's day. They just knew that they had, coloratura was sung, almost, it was sort of quasi off the breath sometimes. And even because sometimes, we do these aspirations, which actually take the voice slightly off the breath to make it a little bit more clearer. In Rossini at any rate. So there's a different technique to singing this stuff. And which is interesting, and I think we all of us all have to examine what we're doing when we're singing this and say, okay, how does Rossini work best with my voice, the way I sing, but what aspects of my voice do I use in order to get this, get the coloratura really clear, and for me not to be too fatigued when I'm constantly singing in the top register and things like that. So it's I think it's a really interesting thing that singers go through. I go through this as a conductor too. My technique for conducting Rossini is very different to what I'm going to be doing when I'm conducting Flying Dutchman. I use a whole different set of physical gestures, and my physicality just feels a lot lighter when I'm conducting this to when I'm conducting Flying Dutchman. And it's not to do with my being more muscular when I conduct Flying Dutchman. It's just a way of holding myself and the way that I use my arms and my fingers that is just a little different.
It'll be interesting. I'll be taking notes as I watch. Greg, I want to bring you back into the conversation here because and I don't want to put you on the spot, but when we were chatting Friday kind of about the stage business, you brought up, and forgive me, the director from the 40s, because I said this was so lively over the course of the studio run on Friday. It's almost like I didn't know where to look because there was so much happening. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about how, where you've taken that inspiration and what you brought to this piece, because it serves it very well and it's very entertaining.
Well, it's Preston Sturges is the director. I also love Mankiewicz. All these films from the 30s and 40s are genius because it's unlike, I love Hitchcock too, but we'll start with Hitchcock. Hitchcock is a different beast. Hitchcock completely focuses your brain on the telephone that's about to ring. And then he pulls you up the stairs with, the glass of milk that's poisoned. You know exactly what to think about. Hitchcock completely leads you through the story. These other directors, Mankiewicz, Preston Sturges, for example, are a little bit broader in their scope, so that there's always something in the background that is somehow related to something in the foreground. And that's when I was a younger director, I followed sort of the Hitchcock rule. I wanted to focus the audience on a certain part of the stage. And there are times when you have to do that. And there are certain tricks of the stage to do the equivalent of a close-up. I teasingly told the singers about, Bertolt Brecht said, if you want to see something on stage, you have to draw a circle around it. So one of the tricks is to do something very slowly, pull it out of your pocket very slowly. And that will somehow focus the audience's vision to a single object on stage. But as I got older as a director, what I wanted to do was keep as many different plates spinning on the bamboo sticks as possible, because what I think is fascinating for an audience is to sort of see things in the background that will eventually move to the foreground. And of course, my main inspiration for this was Beaumarchais' watch. Beaumarchais invented a certain type of escapement in a watch which kept it ticking, And so actually the Act One finale, I haven't told the singers this, is very much about the internal mechanism of a watch. So there's a lot of kind of spirals and circles and people spinning around each other. So
well, it reads that way, maybe not with the specificity that you just gave us, but it reads that way in terms of how the energy on stage, which is fantastic to watch. I want to kind of go around the horn here for a second, because I think one of the questions that came up was from Musa about sort of some of the more dramatic roles that you've done here in Pittsburgh, but obviously this is the complete opposite. And as Maestro sort of elegantly pointed out, the way he approaches things physically as a conductor, curious with our three principal singers, start with you, Musa. Dramatic work or comedy? What do you like more, or what's more challenging?
They're all challenging in different ways. A case in point, I was in Copenhagen. So before I came here, I was in Copenhagen doing a maestro. And I'm a bass baritone. It's a baritone role. So whenever I approach Verdi, there are roles I look at. I'm like, oh, I can do that one. Rigoletto, okay, no, that's pure baritone. Don't touch that. Leave it alone. Or you look at Il Trovatore, no, you leave that alone. But there are roles you're like, oh, okay, Boccanegra, I can do Paolo. Maestro and I were supposed to do that, but of course COVID, killed that opportunity. And so there are roles that I always look at. So Amonazro is one of those roles that it actually took me 2 years to go through it, to slow and bend, because before then I could say, oh, yes, I can do this role. I wanted to like work on that passaggio, get tired until my body got used to it. And so there's a different way to approach it. But both roles, the way I've approached it is on beautiful singing. A coach at AVA, when I was still a student there, asked me a question where he said, tell me, if ever there's one thing about your voice you think stands out, what is it? Me and my ego being younger at 24, I was like, oh, my voice is big. He says, yeah, but there are 3 people I can point to this very school who've got bigger voices than you. So try something else. I was like, I'm tired after 30 minutes of like going back and forth. And he likes, going to those philosophical dimension questions. I was like, just tell me, goddammit, whatever you would. He says, it's the beauty of your voice. He says, if you focus on the beauty of your voice and you sing that 100%, it's going to make whatever impact you want it to. But if you try to force it, it will be like driving a truck into a smaller space. What's going to happen is that it doesn't get through. It gets stuck and it shakes, and then it gets smaller. And so my focus to every role, whether it's a parter role like this or whether it's a monazro, is I'm going to sing on what I know I do best. I'm going to sing on the beauty. I'm going to focus on the legato. So even if I may be doing the parter here or in the quintet, now I can approach the quintet when I'm so angry and bark, and it will take me away from my principle. So for I could do it. So for and then it would get smaller. It would have less impact than I want to. But if I stick to my principle, it'll be so for whatever. Writing on the breath, writing, as the Italians say, sul fiato. So my approach to singing whatever role I'm doing is, last year I did Pizarro. It's a screamy role. And I was like, bloody hell, if I do the way it's written, I could really get off my voice. It'll be ugly. So how do you make an ugly sound from a beautiful singer? I said, I'm going to stick to the beauty, the legato, and do some sounds without sacrificing. It took me a while. So my approach is beauty. And then I can put in the patter, I can put in the German or whatever needs to be put on top of it. But I take my time when I go through these roles, first by myself to go through the words, to go through the phrases, so that by the time I take it to a coach, I already have an idea of what I want. And then the coach will have an idea of what they want, because sometimes you work with this coach, they've worked with this conductor or these singers or in this opera house. So they've got their own set of experiences. And they may not be aware that they're influencing you one way or the other. And so it's important, if you already know what you also want, you can reconcile the two ideas. Because if I don't have any idea, I'm coming in with no idea, I can be influenced such that I move away from my principle and do what they want. and it might just hurt me in the process down the road. So that's my approach. So for me, Amonasro, which is, of course, Amonasro is all over that big orchestra and all the lines. And I was doing it with an Italian conductor who said, yeah, he had worked with Brusson, and for some reason I reminded him of Brusson, because Brusson, while he was a baritone, well, he's still alive, he's no longer singing, but he was not as high of a baritone like other Italian baritones. So he found a way to make his voice work. It sounded like he could sing that high, but it's the way he did it with the technique. And this is what he said. He was like noticing how I was approaching the high notes in a way that it was still making the impact, but I was not killing myself in the process. So I've worked on this for 2 years. That's why. So yeah, that's my approach.
Yeah, I love that. Stephanie, similar question to you. How do you, do you have a preference, one or the other? How do you approach them? How do you get into them?
You all are so insightful. I could listen to everyone all day. So they're so different, and comedy and drama each come with their own sets of challenges to work with. And I, as a person, do connect with comedy. I'm a fast-paced person. I like making beats happen. I like slapstick. I like getting reactions from the audience. I like making people laugh every day, just in regular conversation. And at the same time, I've sung some more dramatic things as well. I've sung a lot of serious Handel roles. I sang Maddalena and Rigoletto once, and that comes with the idea of pacing. And but what's been an educational idea and process experience during our production here is that Greg has often said that comedy is serious business. And so The Barber of Seville is a comedy, but I'm really experiencing playing Rosina as a serious character. And I think that makes her a character that is really endearing, really relatable to the audience. Sure, she's fun and she makes us laugh, but we also know what it's like to not get what we want, and we know what it's like to feel that we deserve better. And I think it adds another layer to the comedy that honestly I haven't experienced in a lot of the other comedic operas that I've done. I've sung L'Italiana in Algeri, I've done Mozart, I've sung La Cenerentola, which also of course has a lot of, it's Cinderella, there's serious themes in that as well. But I'm really thankful that during this process there's been a marriage of the two for me. And I think going forward, they're not going to be so separate anymore. They can really actually enhance each other.
Yeah, I think I love that comment. What is the quote? What is Mr. Keller's quote?
Comedy is serious business.
Well,
the stakes have to be high.
Yeah.
The stakes are as high in a comedy as they are in a tragedy. It's just, your job is to hold, as Hamlet says to the players, hold the mirror up to nature, right? So the girl wants to get the boy. She wants to get out of the house she's locked in. One version is Gilda in Rigoletto. The other version is Rosina in Barber of Seville. One is serious, one is comic. The stakes have to be high. It's just how that mirror reflects reality, whether you distort it like a funhouse mirror. I just say comedy is the same thing as tragedy, but the proportions are a little bit overblown, right? But the impulse has to be the same. The character has to want what they want in the same way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and another thing about this is that sometimes it looks like it's just total chaos on stage, but the chaos is very precise. And that's another thing with an ensemble piece like this, you have to hit your marks, because there as Greg sometimes has said also, don't embellish, and he doesn't mean that ever, but it's sort of like, don't embellish beyond, that pushes things out of, beyond recognition. Because every person is acting and reacting in a very, very specific way. And if you start to act in an unpredictable way, the reactions will become equally as unpredictable. And then you have true chaos, which actually doesn't really make very satisfying theater. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, and Greg and I are on the same, we're on the same message as this, me with musically, things have to be very precise. And then you can take things in slightly different turns, slightly, and the same thing. But it has to be musically precise, especially in the big ensembles first. And it's very interesting. I was watching Citizen Kane yesterday, and I'd never seen it before.
Rosebud is a sled.
Yeah, no, spoiler. But it was interesting when I heard that Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre Company was, they were basically radio actors, right? And basically most of the actors, including Joseph Cotton and people like that, it was their first time on screen. But and Agnes Moorehead, hello Endora from Bewitched, right? Mm-hmm. The fascinating thing that Agnes Moorehead was saying about Orson Welles was that he was so insistent on rehearsing everything, and he would rehearse and rehearse, over rehearse, and the people who were shooting it said that he shot more feet of film than anybody else did up until that time. And what you get from Citizen Kane, I'd never seen it before, and I was just totally blown away by this thing. And I thought, oh yeah, the best film of all time. Well, I don't know about that, but it's certainly one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen. And you can tell that people that they've really been rehearsed. And the performances are so finely etched, but nothing about it. But there are certain things that seem almost improvised, but other things are so intense because they've been rehearsed so thoroughly. And weirdly enough, Una voce poco fa exists in Citizen Kane. That's when he first meets his Susan, his second wife. She sings for him, and she takes him down to the parlor and sings Una voce poco fa. Just the recit of it, and she starts off singing it in English, then she ends up singing in Italian after they cut, and it's really weird. And then he marries her and builds the Chicago Opera House, apparently. So I didn't expect opera to feature in Citizen Kane, but if anyone hasn't seen that, God, see it. Masterpiece. And it's amazing also, especially from being on the inside of the process of creating a multifaceted work of art, multidisciplinary work of art. You just see, I mean, like the cinematography is incredible. And the way the editing is amazing, and just to watch it from a point of view who's someone who loves the process of putting on opera. And then there is a scene where actually she sings opera in a performance. It's really fascinating. But the thing that got me is the idea of everything. I mean, there's no such thing as perfection, but there is such a thing as aiming for perfection and trying to achieve perfection through rehearsal and honing one's own art. And I think that's one of the things that is just so wonderful when you get a group of people who are willing to rehearse and willing to hit their marks, willing to be inventive, because everyone, all three of these wonderful artists, has just tried all sorts of fantastic things, which both Greg and I have said, wow, yeah, love that. Yeah, hadn't thought of that one. Please keep that in. That's great.
Especially Jonathan at the trio in the end of the second act. I could never hear that trio again.
That is fantastic. Yeah. And also at the beginning of the trio, I've been sort of trying to underscore to Lunga and Stephanie how important it is for them to sing beautiful opera seria scene and not worry about what Jonathan's doing.
Right. And
you know, that's the key to that, because they're living their serious lives, and they've just got together, and he's becoming paranoid behind them about something else, and we love it as an audience. We can take in all that information, and it doesn't diminish one iota of the beauty of singing and the sincerity of what Stephanie and Lunga are doing.
Oh, absolutely. No, I was just thinking about that moment. I can't wait to see it again as it develops further on the stage. But John, let me just throw the same question to you in terms of comedy, tragedy, which you like more. What are the elements and aspects you like as well? Just to get your take on this as well.
Oh man, it's tricky. So like vocally, I think it all comes from the same spot. You start with that same base layer of the general technique, and then kind of add a different flavor of icing depending on what you're going after. As far as comedy, I like doing comedy a lot. I find it's very fun, obviously, and especially it makes for a rehearsal environment, and the shows that are this upbeat in nature thing. So from the performance element, I really enjoy that aspect. Doing dramatic work, like two of my favorite things that I've sung are Dr. Atomic and Soldier Songs, which are not happy pieces. But it's like, as an audience member, I don't know, I think dramas sometimes have, particularly in opera, have the danger of a slippery slope of becoming static and boring depending on a production, and that's usually not the case with the comedies. If anything, it's kind of just like, although poorly executed comedy is hard to sit through too. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, they each come with their kind of advantages. I find usually the dramas are the things that I think about for days after, unless it's a kind of like, I went to go see The Play That Goes Wrong in London, and I still think about that. But then I saw the same thing with a different cast, and it didn't quite land. And I was like, that's so weird, because the first time I saw it, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And then the second time I saw it, I was like, eh. So it's interesting, and it really is kind of like you spin the wheel and who knows what you're going to get, because it's also, then it comes down to the producing entity on pulling together a team and singers or actors that work well together. So yeah, but I mean, vocally, I'd say they're generally that same kind of thing. Like, what if I sing Papageno? I'm thinking that same smooth line, as I am with Batter My Heart, although it's a lower tessiture.
Yeah, no, well, I agree. That, I mean, incredible insight from everybody. It is really, I think that the common thread there is that they all have their, equal challenges, and they all have their upsides and challenges. And I think but it was just curious to kind of see how each of you approach those kinds of things. So we are very rapidly approaching time. And so I didn't quite get to every question. Mr. Abramowitz, perhaps offline another time we can discuss the merits of the second oboe. And I do want to actually make a highlight here that Stephanie, very astute, Mark, that Stephanie's one of her first exposure to opera was Pittsburgh Student Matinee. So are you, Stephanie, excited about sort of talk about a full circle moment? How are you looking forward to it?
I'm so stoked. If you had told me 12 years ago that I would be performing a principal role on the very same stage where I saw some of my first operas, I don't think I would have believed it. So, I mean, the moment that I found out that I would be performing on the Benedum stage, that was a really meaningful realization for me. I actually went to SUNY Fredonia outside of Buffalo about 2.5 hours away. And every year they would gather a group of undergrads to come down to Pittsburgh and see an opera at the Benedum. And I believe it was Turandot was my first. I was a freshman and had hardly any exposure to opera. And now all these years later, it's what I do full time. And I couldn't be more thrilled with how things have ended up.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled. I mean, we didn't know any of that when it was all coming together. So we were thrilled when that little piece of information came out, and talk about a full circle moment for you and to be able to, you know, sort of provide that platform. Have you talked to our group sales manager yet? We should get you in touch with her and them. Just
Yes.
Thank you all for taking the time to spend this, you know, last, hour and a half or so. Again, I enjoy these conversations as much as I hope those of you at home have as well. It's always fascinating. I do have the privilege of having seen some of this, so I have a little more context, but it is truly fun to get to have these conversations with all of you. So Musa, John, Stephanie, Antony, Greg, thank you so much for taking a bit of your afternoon on one of your days off and spending it with all of us. We very, very much appreciate it. And those of you who tuned in, thank you so much. If there are other questions along the way, you know where to find me as always, and I can pass along questions. We will see you all in the theater. We will see this cast. I will see you all tomorrow for the Sitzprobe, and very much appreciate, again, taking the time today. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.